Welcome to the 37th ransomware talk of the day. I guess that it's sort of,
It's a ransomware attack.
Right. So here we go. So, it sort of goes without saying, ransomware apparently is kind of a big deal, and we're hearing a lot about it. You guys might be familiar with one of these, but it turns out it's not the only ransomware attack that happened in Ireland this year. There were a few others, and probably actually a lot more than we know about, because one of the big problems we do have with ransomware is that it is currently massively underreported. So the data we have, while very useful, is incomplete. It's a good thing to bear in mind as we go through. So you will recall the HSE attack. I'm assuming everyone's heard of that one. It's very relevant to the talk track of the ransomware task force, because what happened is you might have heard of another big thing that's happened recently, a thing called COVID. And during the past 2 years, hospitals have been sort of attacked pretty much broad scale across the world. And so recognizing this, the Institute for Security and Technology, which is it's a think tank on the West Coast in the US, and it sort of sits at the intersection of security and technology, as its name suggests, and public policy. They sort of looked at the fact that the pandemic, the actual pandemic, not the cyber pandemic, I just put that in for Victoria, was actually being sort of exacerbated by the fact that hospitals were having to deal with these attacks constantly, and that was impacting health delivery. And so they looked at ransomware and they said, it's actually creating a big societal issue, and we should do something about it. So they thought, well, why don't we create a task force to tackle this? And I was a little skeptical to begin with, because as I think many people have mentioned today, ransomware is not a new thing, not a new topic, and it's been around for a really long time. If you Google ransomware, you will find that plenty of security vendors have provided a great deal of information for you to look at, telling you things to do about ransomware. So my question was, how is the task force really going to change things, build on things? What's it going to do differently? And Phil, who is at the Institute of Security and Technology and who was behind this whole idea, his response was, we're not doing what they've done. Our goal isn't to just come out with another thing that says, patch your shit and segment your network. Our goal is to look at societal solutions, look at macro solutions. And really what he was zeroing in on was there was a new administration coming into the US. So the time frame for this conversation was sort of November last year. New administration coming into the White House. They'd already said, hey, we are going to focus on security. Security is going to be a big thing for us. They had committed budget, that kind of thing. And so his point of view was, if we can get a group of experts together and we can look at coming up with a set of recommendations that are aimed at policymakers, and we can hand it to the new administration just at that point where they've started to get their feet under them, but they haven't actually built their full agenda, maybe we can actually influence the directions they go in. So that was the idea. So then he went about and he found a lot of different people to talk to. The task force officially had more than 60 people who participated. In reality, it was, just huge numbers higher than that, at least over 100 on a regular basis. And then we interviewed so many people in organizations that have been victim to attacks, in organizations of all different sizes to understand preparedness levels. We talked to cyber insurers, we talked to incident responders, we talked to law enforcement, we talked to lawyers, academics. You named it. If they have an opinion on ransomware, we talk to them. And we brought all of that together and kind of put it into a melting pot. And we came out with a report, because who doesn't love yet another report on cybersecurity? The report came out, for those who are very eagle-eyed on their dates, a week before the Colonial Pipeline attack. Any suggestion that we may have had anything to do with that is completely false. And the Colonial Pipeline attack, I think, was a week before HSE, and then JBS followed very closely after that. So we had this sort of weird run of 3 very, very, very high-profile ransomware attacks. And that actually, from a report point of view and a government engagement point of view, was kind of helpful, as terrible as that sounds, because the point that it made, that it helped sort of highlight to governments, was this is a societal issue. It requires societal responses. Simply taking a step back and saying this is on organizations to sort out and figure out isn't going to be enough. It hasn't been enough. It hasn't got us where we need to get to. So what else can we do? How can we move forward? So as mentioned, we came up with 48 recommendations. The really good news for you guys, since it is late in the day, is I'm not going to take you through all 48. I'm going to give you sort of a high-level overview. The framework we applied to come up with the recommendations was these 4 principles. How do you deter ransomware attackers? How do you disrupt ransomware attacks? How do you help organizations prepare at scale? And how do you help them respond at scale? A quick note before I go into the recommendations. As I mentioned, the sort of guiding principle on pulling together the task force was very focused on the US administration. And I was the only non-US, I was actually more or less the only non-former US government chair of the task force. But we had participation from law enforcement around the world. Europol was part of it, for example. So a quick shout out to Philip for that. We had NCSC in the UK. We had the RCMP in Canada. We had various organizations from the US government. We tried to get as much international flavor in as we could. And our view is that a lot of the recommendations, while the detail of them, the specifics, are oriented towards US legislation, we believe the principle behind them can be adopted more broadly by other governments, including this one. So the number one thing was we really wanted to see firstly, a sort of whole of government response, a sort of joined up whole of government response. But we also really wanted to see a sort of senior leadership acknowledgement of ransomware as being a societal issue, actually it being a national security threat, which again, these are words that I think I personally sometimes think national security isn't that about sort of tanks and bombs. But actually, when you have hospitals and pipelines closing down, that is a threat to the nation and to the national economy. The JBS attack, I made fun of the fact that people were getting very fired up about the cost of chicken wings until a colleague of mine reminded me, rightly, that in the US, chicken wings are a staple for families that live below the poverty line. The fact that chicken wings are still 10 cents more expensive today than they were before that attack has a profound effect on those families living below the poverty line. So you are looking at economic and social repercussions. We wanted that to be recognized by governments. So what's happened since then? Well, firstly, the G7 lined up on a beach in Cornwall to do the Macarena. And then they, awkwardly, then they put out a communique. They put out this communique after they meet, and it goes through all the different things they talked about and all the commitments they made. And they talked about ransomware, which is kind of insane. And they said, hey, we're going to work together on this. It's going to be a thing, and we're going to try and really focus on it. Now, the G7 then followed up and said, before the end of this year, we will meet specifically on ransomware to come up with a set of commitments that we're going to make. That meeting is currently being worked on for December, and we look forward to hearing what the commitments will be to take into the new year. So the other thing that happened is the President of the United States of America has talked about ransomware on public television at least 8 times this year, which when you really think about it, is kind of astonishing. I mean, it kind of puts cybersecurity in a frame for your average citizen in a way that it just hasn't before. So the fact that they did this, and then the White House sent out a bulletin to people saying hey, you really need to take action, and here's what that looks like. Again, these are really strong indicators that they're taking it super seriously. The Department of Justice also reclassified how they think about ransomware and said, we are going to treat it on the same level as terrorism. There has been a very joined up response through US government. We've seen Treasury come out with things. We're seeing sector regulators come out with things. We're seeing Congress try and get in on the act now with reporting requirements. So there is in the US this sort of very joined up point of view. I will say, like, we've talked to a lot of other governments. They are not making the noise that the US government is making on this, but they are certainly paying a lot of attention to the problem and really trying to understand how they can also get to this sort of joined up response and what that would look like. So the next big thing was, okay, great, you have an individual government pay attention and sort of stand up to be counted. We would like them to collaborate together. We would like them to coordinate their efforts, and in particular, it's very important that they tackle safe havens, not because I specifically hate this movie, though that is true too. Safe havens are nation states that basically create a safe space for attackers, either because they can't prosecute or because they won't prosecute. So what we would like is the governments that are affected by ransomware attacks to figure out how to address that. In the case of nations that can't prosecute, that normally comes down to things like they don't have the resources, they don't have the training, those kinds of things. So the solutions there become a little bit more obvious, right? You can provide training, you can provide funding, you can provide staff. It's expensive to do it, but you can do it. The problem comes with nations that won't prosecute. And there are all sorts of dialogue around why nations do this. There's, a lot of people like to talk about the fact that it furthers the political aims or ambitions of certain nations. In this situation, the classic diplomacy tools that we have in our arsenal, I'm trying not to use military language, but it's hard. They are not working, right? Sanctions have not traditionally worked on this problem. And so sanctions is a completely viable thing to look into, but we have to figure out how to make it work and how to get it taken very seriously. But some things have happened on this. So after that G7 summit, President Biden went to Russia and he met with President Putin, who looks very strange in this picture. And Biden said to Putin, hey, you've got to stop attacking our critical infrastructure. Like, we're drawing a line, no more attacking the critical infrastructure or else. The or else was not super clear, but he said it, and then he did a press conference afterwards and made a big deal about the fact he said it. The jury is somewhat out on what the impact of that has been, but it does seem as though the US government is willing to sort of put its money where its mouth is and follow through. They have, taken action like the recent action against our evil. I'm laughing because it always makes me feel like I should do a pirate accent, like our evil. But yeah, so they are now looking at sort of actions they can take and ways that they can continue to draw this line. I think time will tell how effective this has been. There was some discussion, about over the summer about whether Black Matter's website indicated that ransomware attackers had heard this message and got very scared and were not going to go after critical infrastructure. And it's more likely they were on holiday. So we've certainly seen attacks ramp back up again through September and October. Other things have happened. So the US and NATO got together and they put out a statement saying, ooh, China, bad China, stop using Microsoft Exchange vulnerabilities. I had not seen them do something like this before, particularly NATO. So this was kind of interesting to see them take that stance, like draw that line. Again, hard to quantify what impact this kind of thing has. But I think once they make the public statements that say we want to draw a line, the question becomes, okay, well, how are you going to follow through with that? Where is that line going to be and how are you going to enforce it? Which is when we come back to things like, do sanctions work? Just quick show of hands, how many people are familiar with the sanctions that the US Treasury Department has introduced connected to ransomware? Okay, so I will briefly... So they've taken two primary approaches to this. One is that they have applied sanctions to making payments to specific ransomware groups, ransomware actors. So what they're saying is you can't make a payment to them, right? They're putting them in a specialized group and saying these people can't have payments. I personally think that's a game of whack-a-mole. I think you're just, all that will happen is they'll rebrand. They'll go underground and rebrand. The other approach they've taken is they've put a sanction on a specific exchange, and cryptocurrency, which we'll talk about a little bit more, is an avenue that's interesting and worth pursuing, and it's a little bit less of a moving target. So I think that has a little bit more potential to be impactful. So the EU and the US also launched an initiative against ransomware. I will say this is one of those things where they put out a press release, there was a big thing, and then we don't really know what it means. There hasn't been a huge amount of substance or follow through. I suspect that there are operations in flight that are happening in secret, and we will hear about them when they have successes to share. So again, I look forward to hearing more about what this actually means. So then the next big category, and this is a biggie. This covers a lot of things, is reduce opportunities for attackers to get paid. So the rationale here is pretty straightforward. If extortion-based attacks are basically profit-driven, profit-motivated, the reasoning goes that if we can make it harder for them to get paid, then less people will flood into the market. This is all a good thing for us. So what are the ways that we can do this? There are lots of different things. I mean, this was the challenge for us, as I think it's the challenge for everybody in this room, right? There isn't a silver bullet for ransomware, unfortunately. Just once in security, I would like somebody to be like, no, you know what? There is a silver bullet. I know what it is, and here it is. But that just never happens. And so what we came up with our 48 things was a lot of little things that you could do that individually aren't going to solve much. But if you sort of do them cumulatively, then they might start building a path to progress. So what do some of those things look like? Well, the first is cryptocurrencies, as I mentioned. There are existing cryptocurrency regulations, things like Know Your Customer, which somebody mentioned earlier, and they are not applied evenly internationally. And so we're not even saying, hey, come up with new regulation. We're saying, make sure that the regulation that already exists is being applied consistently. And sort of, work with international governments to help make that happen. That should improve things a little bit. I will say cryptocurrency is a big focus. There was a White House summit with about 30 countries in October. Cryptocurrency ended up being a big focus. I have heard it maybe revisited as a topic at the G7 conversation. So I think we can expect to see more on this. I think in general, what we have not seen, and what I hope we will continue to not see, is an attitude of cryptocurrency is evil, we should kill it. It is, if you look at any of the reports that come out around cryptocurrency tracking, like the Chainalysis reports and that kind of thing, cybercrime equates for less than 1% of the business conducted. So I think it would be wrong to just sort of say we should get rid of cryptocurrency. But we do need to think about the role that it's playing. Next thing is looking at the measures that organizations take. So Bob controversially earlier on mentioned about the fact that people sort of spend time looking for decryption tools and they're not available. Philip responded and said, actually, they are available, and we have seen them work, and we've saved over $900 million in unpaid ransoms. What we found as a group when we interviewed people was that actually most people don't look. They don't know to look. They don't think of looking. They're in a panic. They want the problem to go away as quickly as possible. They leap straight to a conversation of whether or not to pay, and don't stop to look for decryption tools. So one of the things that we suggested is that there could be more of a requirement for organizations to do more due diligence. We do believe that No More Ransom is a great project. We fully support it. We would like the US government to participate, but they don't want to. But we do recommend it. Another thing is that we believe that governments, particularly in more developed economies, should look at whether they can provide a safety net for their most vulnerable or critical organizations. So critical infrastructure and your small to medium businesses. Can you set up a fund that enables them to get on a path to recovery? And can you also provide resources to help them with that? Or can you provide the resources for preventative measures? So for example, if you are, I was going to say an SLTT, but I'm going to have to now go state, local, tribal, or territory. and that's what it is, in the US, which is the sort of all the different types of local government, CISA, the Department of Homeland Security's department, which is the Critical Infrastructure Security, Cybersecurity and Critical Infrastructure Security Agency, they have a bunch of free services that they provide, right, to help state and locals and other areas of critical infrastructure basically avoid becoming victims. So that's the kind of thing. Can we do more of that? Help organizations adopt these capabilities, give them a fund. I mean, you could make it so that they pay back, but they pay back through preferential timings or whatever terms. And then the other thing is mandating reporting. So as I said at the very beginning, one of the problems we have with ransomware is too little information, too little clarity of what's really going on. The idea of having some regulation to mandate reporting, we talked earlier on about GDPR having some requirement for this. The NIS directive is currently being updated by the EU. NIS 2 will have broader mandates for reporting. In the US, there is a piece of legislation currently going through Congress, which mandates the reporting of ransom incidents. And for the task force, one of the things that we considered might be an idea would be to have an independent body that people could report to, because one of the things that we hear is that organizations are afraid of reporting because they're afraid of regulatory response. So the idea was we would have a sort of clearinghouse that would aggregate and anonymize the data, share it out to the relevant people, and could act as a liaison with government entities or law enforcement if necessary, but wouldn't sort of require it of people. Now, the thing we always get asked about is prohibiting payments. Should we ban payments? And we talked about it at length, and we couldn't come to agreement on this. There may have been some friendly arguments over this topic, and I think, everybody had a sort of good intent behind it. Pretty much everybody agreed paying ransoms is not palatable, and in general seems like a bad idea, in that you are legitimizing crime, you're funding crime, you're enabling the bad guys to invest more in their infrastructure and their capabilities. You could be funding other kinds of crime, which is also not very nice. And the more that other people see those headlines about big paydays, the more people flood into the market and you get like a lot more attackers, right? And again, the reasoning applies that if you ban payments and then you send a strong signal to attackers that says you're definitely not getting paid, that then they will go and they will do other things with their time. They'll just go, oh, I'll go straight. It'll be fine. The reality, though, is I don't know that anyone's super sold on the idea that they'll just be like, time to get a proper job. It's much more likely that they're going to play a game of chicken. And if I were a ransomware attacker, which I'm not, and I keep saying it into the microphone, I would start by targeting organizations that have the least ability to resist payment. So critical infrastructure, because they have no tolerance for disruption, and small businesses because they have very little resilience typically. That's what I would go after. So you're basically, if you ban payments today from where we are right now, you are drawing a giant target, I believe, on your most critical and your most vulnerable. If instead you say, hey, our goal is to get to a prohibition of payments, we want to get to that goal in 2 years, 3 years, then you can figure out what steps you need to take. And then you go back to looking at the things that we just talked about, things like creating a safety net, having reporting, looking at the role of cryptocurrencies, driving adoption of preventative measures, those kinds of things. So that's why we didn't put in a recommendation for prohibition of payments, although there was an interest in getting there. So last one, I promise you, a clearer path to preparedness and response. One of the things that we heard overwhelmingly from people, and you might feel some sympathy with this after sitting through 37 ransomware talks today, we heard from people that there's a ton of fucking information about ransomware. Oh, did I mention I have a bit of a potty mouth? Sorry about that. And it's overwhelming and it's confusing. A lot of guidance is either like really simplified or it's really complicated. It's not tailored to your sector. It's not tailored to your size of organization. It's not tailored to the level of resources you have or the point that you're at in your journey of maturity. And so we heard organizations say it's just overwhelming. They have analysis paralysis. They don't know where they get started. We say to people, you should patch, you should segment your network, you should have identity and access management. Where's your email filtering? What are you doing for user awareness? And we talk about it as if that's a Monday morning for people. Have any of you done that in a single morning, just out of interest? No? Okay. So one of the things that we heard a request for a lot was to have a much more sort of single source of truth on ransomware. Something like the NIST framework, or if you prefer the ISO reference, the ISO framework, that would be adaptable for people and it would create a path to maturity and you could have profiles applied to it. So in response to this, NIST created a profile for the cybersecurity framework. I can totally understand why they took this approach because NIST's view is this is defense in depth. It's not different to a standard defense in depth program just because there's an emphasis on backups. It's still defense in depth. And we have a framework for that. So why create a new framework? Instead, let's apply a profile. That rationale doesn't seem bad to me, but the feedback that I have heard from people is that they still feel that this doesn't quite get them where they want to go. A lot of governments have also taken a step of creating a sort of one-stop shop for information. So CISA has a website called Stop Ransomware. And it's worth checking out those kinds of resources as well. If you're looking for solutions here, No More Ransom also has a lot of resources available for people. So that's it. I'm now going to stop talking. Here's the place to go if you want to look at the full report and read all 48 recommendations. It is the link, that's not the full link, obviously, but it's very easy to find on that website. And if you have questions about it, I'd be happy to answer them, although I think we're out of time for right now, but I'll be around. Okay. Well, we have 3 minutes. So if anyone has a question for me, let's go. Yes. Ooh, Mr. Honan. Yeah. I really hoped you weren't going to ask me that. So for those who didn't hear, the question was, did Ireland participate in an official capacity? Not to the best of my knowledge. Sorry. But if the Irish government would like to talk to us, we'd be super happy to talk to them. Any other questions? Yep. Oh. Yeah. Yeah, we did talk about it. So the question was, did we think about the role of cyber insurance companies? One of my fellow co-chairs was from a cyber insurance company. And I think it would be fair to say that we started the process very far away from each other. And I was probably more accusatory than I should have been. And he handled it with good grace. Here's the thing that I learned through the process of interviewing an awful lot of organizations. Some basics. One, not all insurance companies are made the same. It's a really, really complex market with a lot of variety in terms of approach and attitude. Two, if you are looking at organizations at the lower end of the market, if you're looking at small businesses who have no real path to resilience, cyber insurance is often what they have. It's that or nothing. And if you take that away from them, or if you mandate insurers to require a security baseline, then those small businesses lose any sense of resilience at all. And it's not, you can't simply say, well, you need to go take preventative measures because they just don't have the capacity or the resources to do it. That said, I definitely feel the frustration that others have shared around the fact that insurers have at times pushed organizations to pay and have on-staff negotiators as a default position, and sometimes won't cover for recovery, but will cover for paying. And I think that's a problem. And I think we need to look into that a little bit more. What I can say is at the bigger insurance companies that sort of lead the market and have the market share are losing money, like hand over fist losing money. And so they are now changing their strategy, and they are now making requirements for security program as part of their policy. The problem is that the industry is built up of these big guys, and then this like very long tail of very small guys who, because what they want is just to get market share, they will use it as a USP that they don't require a baseline. So it's tough. The other thing that I got told pretty consistently was the way that insurance works is if you legislate in the UK, then they'll move the policies to Switzerland or to the US. So you'd have to get all the countries concerned to legislate in the same way at the same time. And now I'm out of time. Thank you very much. I really appreciate your time.